Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy, family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574 today. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Against the Boards. Chamberlain Bauder here with you, Paul Russo producing, and we are ready to get rolling with our indoor sports in Western New York. And obviously we're going to start out with the Knighthawks, whose season ended last week. And honestly, we're going to keep the discussion here pretty short because we've got a playoff preview to get to that's going to be happening later today. And it's going to be much more entertaining to talk about the team that is still playing than it will be to talk about the team that has stopped playing. So keeping it short and sweet with the Hawks. If you did not watch the preview last week talking about this game, I highly recommend that you do, because actually it turns out I think I almost hit every single point that wound up coming up in this game. At the end of the day, Vancouver played their game. Rochester did not get to their game because Vancouver's defense was too strong, too physical, and too good at forcing Rochester out. The entire first quarter, it was just 2 shots on goal in the first 10 minutes of play. It was turnovers with passes trying to get down to the crease where they were forcing the ball down low when it wasn't actually open. And in those situations, Connor Fields was often in the middle, and you didn't have your A1 guy to get rebounds out on the edge to get those rebounds, so they weren't creating second chances on their possessions. At the end of the day, yes, they put up 57 shots against Christian Del Bianco. That's just not enough. Really, I mean, he stopped 82% of the shots. He had 47 saves. At the end of the day, you have to have more shooters put up more shots against a guy like Christian Del Bianco. And what I mean by that, in this game, 4 players for the Rochester Knighthawks had more than 1 point. Point, not goal, 1 point. It was, of course, Ryan Lanchberry, Connor Fields, Thomas McConvey, Ryan Smith. No surprise at who the 4 are. However, Kyle Waters has 5 shots on goal in that game and only 1 goal to show for it. Curtis Knight only took 1 shot on goal in the entire game. Graydon Hogg had no shots on goal in the entire game. At the end of the day, this team did not get to their game. And that is what led to the result. Obviously, on the flip end of it, we have to talk about Rylan Hartley, who ended the day with an unfortunately terrible full goals against average. If you were to take his numbers and put them on a 60-minute spread instead of a 34-minute spread, which is what he played, he averaged 18.8 goals against in that performance, and in 25 minutes in goal, Riley Hutchcraft only averaged 4.5 goals against in that period. So personally, looking at the Knighthawks, I still love the system that they have with the 2 goalies back and forth. Unfortunately, though, one of the things that I asked Coach Hazen about last week in the press conference was Rylan Hartley's mentality and how teams can dial that in. And he said that would be the magic answer. And I hate to say this, but I think they need the magic answer if they want this team to be able to succeed in the playoffs later on. Yes, Hartley is a young goalie, but at the end of the day, you got to find the controllables and figure out what they are and how to control them. And that mentality should 100% be a controllable. Being able to get into that mindset is something that comes after time and time again of doing it. There needs to be some assessment there of what happened to get to these certain points to have good games, and trying to copy that and replicate that. So Hawks are out. What did I say for a prediction? I know I picked the Hawks, but let's be honest, I kind of made a general score prediction. 15-11 was my prediction. I said the game winner would be scored in the third quarter, and it would be someone chasing and not being able to get to it in the fourth, and that is literally exactly what happened. 15-10 is the final score. The game winner scored by Riley Lowen with 7.5 minutes to 7.5 minutes into the third quarter of that game. And then the Knighthawks try to chase in the fourth and ultimately can't get it done. So quick glance to the rest of the National Lacrosse League. Of course, Halifax and Saskatchewan will be matching up on one side of the bracket, Buffalo and Vancouver on the other. Now, here's the fun conversation for any Americans that are fans of the NLL watching. There's only one American team left, so maybe you should root for Buffalo. It's a hard thing to do, though, to root for a back-to-back champion, honestly. In my opinion, I'm just such an underdog fan that I'll always do that. On the other side of the bracket, Rochester fans, we know we're not going to be rooting for the Halifax Thunderbirds. So at the end of the day, now we look at, there's 4 teams. I think you just root for Vancouver, because ultimately, if the team that beat you in the first round of the playoffs wins the whole thing, you get a little bit of vindication. Just a little bit. Not much. Just a little bit. But you do get some. So I'm choosing Vancouver to root for the rest of the playoffs. Do I think that they're going to win? I don't know. I really don't know. I think Halifax is going to make it out of their matchup with Saskatchewan. I think that Buffalo is going to make it hard, but at the end of the day, if they shoot like they did against San Diego, which they won that game 5-4, and genuinely, I just tracked that game actually. So many of the Bandits shots were just off the chest of Chris Origlieri. So they're definitely going to have to change up their shots against El Bianco, but I think this Vancouver team could prove to be quite a problem for them on that side. And unfortunately for Knighthawks fans, I do think that Halifax will make it out on the other side. So hopefully I'm wrong, though. I guess we'll just have to wait and see for this weekend. A Friday matchup for Vancouver and Buffalo, Saturday for Saskatchewan and Halifax, and then Sunday for Vancouver and Buffalo game 2. Now, let's talk about the much more apparent and much more important right now, Rochester Knighthawks, who, as of today, are 2-0 against the Syracuse Crunch and ready for Game 3 here today, which will, of course, be in Syracuse. So coming off of last Sunday, I was able to go. All my pictures that you're going to be seeing here, the Amerks absolutely rolled on Sunday in that game against Syracuse. 4-0 was the final score. Devin Levi makes 35 saves. We'll talk about him in a minute. But ultimately, the way that this game goes and the story of this game on Sunday was all about the defenseman. Cale Clegg scores the kind of ceiling goal late in the third period, but it's capped off by the fact that when he did that, he was one of only 4 defensemen for the Rochester Americans that was actively playing in the third period of this game. Things went to hell. Really no other way to put it. One of the questions that I asked Coach Leo about last week in our interview that we had air was, which defenseman do you scratch and how do you kind of work around that situation? They're not going to have to be worried about which defenseman they scratch anymore because Sidorov Komarov got rocked. And, let's just watch. Jack Finley, the first-line center for Syracuse there in that fight. And right when you think Komarov's on top, he goes down. Like a sack of bricks, unfortunately, and really, knocked completely out cold in that spot there with about, 5 minutes to go in the second period. Blood on the ice. They had to bring on the blood crew. It slowed everything down at that point in the second period. There was honestly about a 10-minute stoppage of play to clean up from that. So, good for the Amerks. No momentum built out of that fight win for Syracuse whatsoever. Now, though, they're looking at a situation where they are now shorthanded on defense, running with one less defender. Unfortunately for the Amerks, 2 minutes after that, Jack Rathbone gets clocked in the corner on a cheap shot and has to slowly skate to the bench, and he thankfully does so successfully, getting to the bench and ultimately getting off the ice, goes to the locker room with about 2.5 minutes left to play in the second period. And then finally, in the closing 2 minutes of the period, the Amerks get a power play. Now, Amerks fans, maybe not just someone who only watched the Amerks this year, but who scores on the power play? Anybody want to take a guess? Maybe, just maybe, it is the man himself who should always be on the power play, but somehow, while he was in Buffalo almost all year this year, never took one power play rep. Of course, Yuri Kulik scores a power play goal with 10 seconds left in the second period to make it a 2-0 game for the Amerks. Off of a face-off by Josh Dunn, pops it out to Cale Clegg. He sends it right across over to the 1T for Kulik, and absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, Kulik being back on this team is just so clutch. Having that NHL first-line center on your team, but then also someone who has grown up as an Amerk, understands how the Amerks play, and understands the environment that he's in, being in a playoff game in Blue Cross Arena. And yeah, absolute money ball that he let go with literally less than 10 seconds left in the second period to score that second goal and really put the Amerks in cruise control area, potentially. But with that goal, and then the way the last 10 seconds of the period go, we get another scrum from Syracuse and Rochester, and Zach Metza ends up being the one tied up on the inside of it, and he gets a 10-minute game misconduct to open the third period. So now Sidolov Komarov is injured, knocked unconscious, probably in concussion protocol. Jack Rathbone just went down with a cheap hit in the offensive zone and went to the locker room with about 3 minutes left in the period. And now Zach Metza is going to have to sit in the box, or not sit in the box, but not come into the game for the first 10 minutes of the third period. Well, it takes guts, first of all, to play the sport of hockey. And the other thing about playoff hockey is there's a big difference between being hurt and being injured. And according to Jack Rathbone, he was only hurt. And so in the third period, he comes right back into the game, flying high. And now the Amerks have 4 defenders in Nikita Novikov, Jack Rathbone. We're going through the list right now. Ryan Johnson and Cale Clegg, the 2 reinforcements that get sent down. Brandstrom was the scratch for that game. We'll talk about that in a second too. So with 4 defensemen and then eventually the reinforcements of Zach Metza for the final 10 minutes of the game, the Amerks close out a 4-0 win. They scored 2 more, one from Clegg and Brandstrom, and then one on the empty netter for Isak Roseyan, which honestly might have somehow still been one of the prettiest goals of the game, just backhanded, no angle on the goal line for an empty netter. Absolutely disgusting from Rosie, honestly. But at the end of the day, Amerks roll and play with the physicality and don't let it shake them. And they go to 2-0 on the series, now only needing one more game in this matchup here against the Syracuse Crunch. And so, who's going to be a key linchpin to that one? Well, of course, In-Cage has been for this playoff series so far. The man with the new mask for this final stretch of the season, Devin Levi, had his first ever playoff shutout on Sunday last week with his 35 saves. But he also, of course, just in this stretch is proving to get so many important and crucial minutes because playoff hockey is simply just different. And also, the way that the rest of the team is setting up around it ends up being a little bit different. Now, the question will be when he has to take on a couple of NHL caliber guys, which he might have to do now, will he be able to come out with the same performance? I guess ultimately we can really just hope. The other interesting thing with this, and as we say, more NHL talent, Maxwell Crozier and Connor Geekie both sent down today from Tampa Bay. However, they were sent down today. So I don't know if they'll be there in time for that game tonight, or even if they are there in time, if they're going to say, well, yeah, you know our game plan, let's throw you in the lineup. So that makes today a very interesting game. Potential for reinforcements waiting in the wings for Tampa, and a chance for this young goalie who just posted his first playoff shutout, a young group of defensemen who now will have Erik Brandstrom likely added in for Sedilov Komarov. Can they close it out today before this matchup legitimately gets harder, which is what it will be? Ultimately, we'll have to just wait and see. But another area that I want to talk about with these Amerks that has surprised me, to say the least, we talked about it last week with what defensemen get scratched from this group, and I thought it would be Zach Metza. I also acknowledged when I said that I thought he was an eventual captain of this Amerks squad, but at this point in his career and at this point with the guys that they have on the team, it might just make more sense for him to be the scratch and you run Brandstrom because he's one of your prospects, which opens up another conversation that we'll have in a second about Brandstrom and the Sabres wanting their prospects to get playing time and not getting playing time and whatnot. But ultimately, when he comes out for this playoff stretch, Zachary Metza has an A on his chest. And 100% deserved A on his chest, takes the A of Ethan Prow for that defensive crew on the back end. Of course, one of the guys that's been an Amerk all season long. You didn't want to just give it to Cale Clegg probably. And ultimately, when you look at those guys that are down there for their defensemen, they're so young. Why would you not take the national champion captain as someone to get an A on their chest? But it's awesome to see that Metza is still getting playing time here for the Amerks down this playoff stretch, and he is not at all thought of as the scratch guy for the group, which makes sense. Ultimately, the other thing too that's interesting is, thinking about who's going to run those power plays, and that was something that ultimately Coach Leo was thinking about in that third period specifically, was who is running our power plays and how do we make sure no more defensemen get sent to the box or get taken out of this game, and play it smart in that situation. But ultimately, Metza is an Amerk, and he's an Amerk captain now with an A on his chest. So today is potentially the last one, like we're saying here. Obviously, if they don't win today, more reinforcements. Those reinforcements could still be there either way today. It could just be that they got sent down earlier and it was on paper. That today is when that official change happened. But ultimately, we'll know tonight with the asterisks next to games on Saturday this weekend and Friday next week. Today could be the last one of this specific series for the Amerks. And then they would actually, if they finish it in 3, let's talk about that real quick. Because I predicted in 4. So let's put that into space. I did say this would probably go to Saturday. It would make sense for Syracuse to pull out at least one at home. But as we look to the AHL playoff picture right now, it's interesting because the 2-3 side of the bracket in division has less games all in all that have to get played, because what happened is you have the play-in series that occurred between Cleveland and between Toronto, and then the winner of that goes to Laval. So that series, which is supposed to mirror the 2-3 series, started later. Already has started later. Also, Laval decided that when they went to play against Cleveland, they wanted to go to Cleveland for the first 2 and then come home to Laval for the last 3. So at the end of the day, the way that would shake up would be the likeliest chance for a Cleveland win to come early on in that section. Of course, not the way it's going right now. But ultimately, as we look at it right now, Laval is up 1-0 in that series. Their next game is tomorrow. So the Amerks finish this series here today, and if Cleveland pulls out one of the next 2 games, then there is guaranteed extension on the way that this series will go. Ultimately, just keeping an eye on Cleveland and Laval, because realistically, I also think that Cleveland is probably the one team in the North that might be able to just push Laval to an extent, really. But ultimately, like we said, a chance if they win here They don't have to worry about playing for basically a week. That would be the case that they'd be looking at for that. So 7 o'clock start, 7 o'clock puck drop for that game 3 for the Rochester Amerks will be tonight. They play in Syracuse, of course. I bet you tickets are potentially still available. Day of, they might not be. Well, we're pretty close, but I know someone yesterday offered me some tickets around the $30 price range, so definitely worth taking a quick check at the arena to see if there's anything open. And like I've said before, Tampa Bay fans don't like this line, but definitely an interesting arena that you should get to if you have the opportunity. If you've ever wanted to know what it would be like to have a venue that could easily house a full concert during intermissions while playing a hockey team, that's your place for it. It's pretty cool. That's going to do it for us this week for Against the Boards. As we said, Amerks 2-0. Game starts at 7 o'clock tonight. The Knighthawks done with the year and looking for vindication with a Vancouver run to the final. Big thanks to my producer, Paul Russo. I've been Chamberlain Bauder. We'll see you next week.